Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack history's huge data sets, pull out the really crucial stuff you need to grasp the world today. And today, we're tackling something massive, decoding the story of India across, 30,000 years.
It really is essential to get your head around the scale here. India isn't just one history, it's this subcontinent, right? Pioneers in math, philosophy, urban planning. We're tracing lines from ancient empires to, a modern nation of over 1.4 billion people, a nation dealing with huge diversity, massive geopolitical pressures. It's a lot.
So our goal for you today is to give you that shortcut. We're not just listing emperors and dates. We want to extract the key knowledge nuggets. The big shifts in belief, why empires actually rose and fell, the political plays that forged the world's biggest democracy.
And let's start with a bit of historical whiplash, if you will. When Europeans like Vasco da Gama showed up in the 16th century, they were chasing riches, trying to grab trade routes. They thought they were, discovering new opportunities, but they were stepping onto land where civilizations had been thriving for thousands of years.
Right. They weren't finding empty space. They were blundering into this incredibly deep, complex history already in progress.
Exactly. A very old, very sophisticated history.
Okay, so let's dive in. We need to start at the beginning, the real foundation. Part 1, roughly 30,000 BC up to about 700.
Right at the start, you have the Adivasi. These are India's ancient native peoples. Their presence goes back maybe 30,000 years. Incredible time scale. For most of that time, they were nomadic or semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer, living off the land long before settled farming became widespread.
And what's really striking is how their history survived, isn't it? It wasn't carved in stone like later groups.
No, exactly. It's mostly oral tradition, passed down through generations among their descendants today, which means for archaeologists, there's not a huge amount of physical evidence. It leaves this big gap in understanding India's deepest past.
Huge contrast to what comes next then, these massive urban pioneers.
A dramatic shift, yeah. We move to the Indus Valley Civilization, the IVC. It emerges late 4th millennium BC, centered on the Indus River, one of the world's first great urban societies. It lasted for something like 2,000 years, peaked around 2600 BC, and at that peak, maybe 5 million people lived. Huge.
And these weren't just villages, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro. The planning is incredible. We're talking standardized brick, planned street grids.
Sophisticated infrastructure, too. Actual sewage systems, public baths, things that were, frankly, unmatched anywhere else for over 1,000 years.
It's mind-boggling. But comparing it to, say, Egypt or Mesopotamia, the IDC looks different, doesn't it? Less focus on giant monuments.
That's a key point. You don't see the massive pyramids or ziggurats, no obvious giant royal palaces or temples dominating the landscape. It suggests maybe a different kind of governance, perhaps city councils, powerful merchant guilds running things, rather than god kings demanding huge public works. It's fast.
Which brings us to the big mystery. All this engineering, this huge civilization lasting millennia. But we still can't read their writing. What does that mean for understanding them?
It's a massive gap. Like history's great lost war, as you said before. We have these seals, these inscriptions. But until someone cracks the code, we can't name a single ruler, not one king, not even a specific god they worshipped. We see the scale, the cities, but the who and the why of their internal life almost.
So this incredibly successful civilization, how did it end? It wasn't a sudden catastrophe, was it?
No, not like Pompeii or something. It was a slow decline, a gradual fading out. Started around 1900 BC, lasted maybe until 1300 BC.
Yeah.
And the main drivers seem to have been environmental, climate. The region got cooler, drier after 1800 BC.
Which would mess up the monsoons, right? The agriculture depended on those predictable rains.
Absolutely. Disrupting the monsoon cycle was devastating for their agriculture, which is the bedrock of the whole society.
And there were other natural forces at play, too. Earthquakes, rivers changing course.
Yeah, geological evidence suggests earthquakes gradually shifted the Indus River westward. So key cities in the east lost their main water source. That makes large settlements pretty much unsustainable over time.
But the people didn't just evaporate. If the cities declined, where did the population go? What's the thinking there?
Well, the dominant theory is migration. They moved southeast, deeper into the Indian subcontinent. And there's a strong linguistic theory linked to this, that these IVC migrants were the ancestors of the people who speak Dravidian languages today. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, down in the south.
So that suggests a massive population shift, moving the cultural center of gravity southwards, potentially.
Potentially, yes. A foundational shift in India's demographic landscape. Hashtag tag 2, the rise of the Vedic peoples and the Varna system.
Okay, so as the IVC fades, a new group rises to prominence. The Vedic peoples, sometimes called Indo-Aryan, they migrate in from Central Asia around 1500, settling first in the Punjab.
That's right. And their arrival was transformative. They brought a couple of key things. First, the domesticated horse,
which is a game changer for movement and warfare, especially with chariots.
Huge military advantage. And second, After about 1200 BC, they mastered ironworking.
And iron tools are what let them really settle the land, right? Clear the forest, especially in the Ganges plain.
Exactly. Iron axes, iron plow, that allow them to tame the really thick forests and jungles covering the Gangetic plain. So they could shift from being semi-nomadic pastoralists to settled farmers along the Ganges and Yamuna rivers. A fundamental change in lifestyle.
And culturally, they brought a new language, Vedic Sanskrit, and these incredibly important texts, the Vedas.
Yes, the Vedas are collections of hymns, philosophy, rituals. The Rig Veda is the oldest, composed around 1500 BC. These texts are the absolute bedrock of later Indian philosophy, religion, what eventually evolves into Hindu.
This shift in lifestyle, new settlements, new beliefs, it also led to the development of that very specific social structure, the Varna or caste. How did that evolve?
Initially, it seems to have been a simpler division between the Aryan or Vedic warrior groups and the local non-warrior population. But it solidified, became much more rigid over time, and it gets codified in texts like the Purusha Sukta in the Rig Veda, which uses this analogy of a cosmic being's body to explain the hierarchy.
Right, the body analogy. Can you break that down?
Sure. So, the head represented the Brahmin. They were the priests, the scholars. Their duty was to study, preserve, teach the sacred text. Then the arms and hands were the Kshatriya, the warriors, rulers, administrators. Power, authority, the right to rule and wage war.
Okay, then the thighs, the economic engine.
That's the Vaishya. Landowners, merchants, farmers, traders, the people creating the wealth. And finally, the feet were the Shudra, the laborers, peasants, artisans. Their role was defined as serving the other three Varnas.
And this system laid down a social blueprint that, it still casts a very long shadow today, despite huge changes.
Absolutely. Its legacy is profound.
Yeah.
But it's also crucial to remember, India wasn't monolithic even then. While the Vedic culture was spreading in the north, you had other distinct groups elsewhere, like the Jorwe culture down in the Deccan Plateau in Maharashtra around 1400 to 700.
Yes, the Jorwe. Known for some unusual archaeology.
Very unusual. Archaeologically, they're famous for really strange burial practices. Nearly all the skeletons found have had their feet cut off before burial.
Feet cut off? Why?
We honestly don't know. And they also left behind artifacts depicting headless gods. Bizarre.
So what does the Jorwe culture tell us about the reach of Vedic influence at that time?
It tells us it wasn't immediate or total. There were significant, distinct local cultures thriving outside that main Vedic stream, developing their own unique and sometimes very strange tradition. India was already a complex patch.
Okay, so that Vedic period, with the texts being written and the Varna system hardening, lasts about 1,000. Then, around 700, 600 BC, we see a second wave of urbanization. New cities are growing.
Yes, and these cities become centers not just of trade, but of political power. We see the rise of the Janapadas, city-states, which then consolidate into about 16 larger kingdoms or republics called Mahajanapadas, like Magadha, Kuru. These become real power centers.
And these new urban centers weren't just political hubs, they were also centers for this incredible intellectual and spiritual ferment, right? A questioning of the old Vedic ways.
Absolutely. The growing complexity, maybe the perceived rigidity or injustice of the Brahmin-dominated system, it pushed thinkers to look for new paths to spiritual liberation outside the traditional Vedic frame. Tag 3, the Mahajanapadas and the birth of new faith.
Let's talk about Jainism first. Founded by Mahavira in the 6th century BC, he was a prince who gave it all up.
That's the tradition. A prince who became an ascetic, practiced extreme self-discipline for 12 years, and achieved jnana, which is like omniscience or enlightenment. He then taught the core principles of Jainism, and those principles are demanding: truthfulness, not stealing; chastity or celibacy; non-attachment to possession; and the most famous one, ahimsa.
Total nonviolence, that's the defining feature, symbolized by the open palm.
Total nonviolence towards all living beings. It's incredibly strict, governing diet, profession, everything. And Jainism is still a major faith today, with millions of followers adhering to these principles.
And around the same time, also in the 6th century BC, we see the emergence of Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. His story is maybe more widely known. Sheltered prince sees suffering.
Right. The story goes he was shielded from all suffering, then encountered old age, sickness, death, and finally an ascetic monk. This shocked him out of his privileged life and set him on a quest for enlightenment.
He also became an ascetic, but found extreme self-denial didn't work for him either.
Correct. He tried extreme asceticism, but found it didn't lead to ultimate understanding. His breakthrough came through meditation, specifically while meditating under the Bodhi tree for, tradition says, 49 days. That's when he achieved nirvana, the extinguishing of desire, which breaks the cycle of suffering and rebirth, samsara.
That path sounds incredibly difficult too. But did the Buddha's middle path offer something more accessible to ordinary people compared to, say, Jain asceticism or the complex Vedic ritual?
I think that was absolutely key to its appeal. His core teachings, the Four Noble Truths, suffering exists, it has a cause, desire, It can cease, and the Eightfold Path is the way to end it. They offered a practical guide. And the Middle Path explicitly rejected both extreme luxury and extreme self-torture. It was a more balanced approach. Crucially, it was open to everyone, regardless of their Varna or caste. That was revolutionary. Merchants, laborers, women, they could all follow this path.
And concepts like karma and reincarnation, they were shared with Jainism and later, too, part of a broader Indian philosophy.
Yes, those ideas about actions having consequences across lifetimes were becoming central to Indian thought around this time.
Okay, so we have these new philosophical currents. How does this connect to political power? Magadha, one of those Mahajanapadas, emerges as the dominant force. Why Magadha? What advantages did it have?
Several key things. Geographically, it was perfectly situated in the Ganges Basin, ideal environment for wet rice cultivation.
Which means food surplus, stable tax.
Exactly. Reliable food surplus supports large populations, large armies, and a stable government funded by tax. Magadha also had great access to iron ore for weapons and tools, and critically, elephants.
War elephants, a defining feature of Indian armies for centuries.
A huge asset in warfare. So Magadha had the food, the resources, and the military tech. It saw a succession of dynasties, Haryana, Shishanaga, and Nanda, culminating in the Nanda Empire. The Nandas controlled a massive territory, and ancient sources, possibly exaggerating but still indicative, claimed they could field 200,000 infantry and thousands of elephants. They had a fearsome reputation.
A reputation so fearsome, it actually stopped Alexander.
It seemed so. Alexander invaded northwestern India in 326 BC, defeated King Porus in a tough battle at the Hydaspes River. He'd conquered the Persian Empire, seemed unstoppable.
But his army just stopped at the Bees River. Why?
The sources say his troops were exhausted, homesick, yes, but also genuinely terrified by reports of the huge Nanda army waiting for them further east. They mutinied, refused to go further. Alexander's failure to push deeper into India is actually a massive turning. It leaves a power vacuum.
Which is filled almost immediately by Chandragupta Maurya around 320 BC.
Exact. Chandragupta, aided by his brilliant, maybe ruthless advisor Kautilya, the author of the famous political treatise, the Arthashastra, overthrew the Nanda dynasty.
These origins are a bit murky though, right? Son of a king, peacock farmer.
Sources conflict, yeah.
Yeah.
Adds to the mystique.
Yeah.
But whatever his origins, he rapidly expanded the empire west.
And that brought him into conflict with Alexander's successors, the Seleucids, who controlled Persia and the eastern parts of Alexander's conquest.
Right, the Seleucid-Mauryan War. It's another one of those great lost wars because details are scarce. But we know Chandragupta won decisively. He gained control of the Indus Valley, Afghanistan, huge swath of territory. The peace treaty involved a marriage alliance, and famously, Chandragupta gave the Seleucids 500 war elephants in exchange for the land. Shows how valuable those elephants were.
And his capital, Pataliputra, it was legendary.
Absolutely. The Seleucid ambassador, Megasini, wrote descriptions of it. He talks about walls stretching 21 miles, nearly 600 towers, 60 gates, a truly massive fortified imperial city. Under Chandragupta and his successors, the Mauryan Empire becomes the first state to unify almost all of the Indian subcontinent, except for the very southern tip and the Kalinga region on the east coast. #5. Ashoka the Great and the Mauryan Zenith.
The empire reaches its after Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka. And Ashoka's story is just incredibly transformative.
It really is. He starts out as a pretty typical ambitious ruler. He wages this brutal war to conquer the Kalinga region, the last major independent kingdom. The sources speak of horrific bloodshed, maybe 100,000 soldiers killed, 150,000 people deported. Ashoka himself later writes about the immense suffering caused.
And seeing that carnage changed him fundamentally.
Completely. Around 261 BC, horrified by the violence he'd unleashed, he renounces warfare. He converts to Buddhism and dedicates the rest of his reign to ruling according to Dharma, moral law, righteousness, nonviolence.
And he didn't just keep this to himself. He broadcasted it using those famous pillars, the edicts of Ashoka.
Yes, these inscribed pillars and rock edicts were set up all across the empire. They're extraordinary documents. He publicly confesses his remorse for the Kalinga War, details his efforts to govern justly. He talks about building hospitals for people and animals, digging wells, planting shade trees along roads for travelers, promoting religious tolerance. He also actively patronized Buddhism, sending missionaries as far as Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, even Greece and Egypt. He really turned Buddhism into a world religion.
An incredible legacy. But the empire itself, it didn't last long after him.
No, the Mauryan zenith was relatively brief. Ashoka's policy of nonviolence, while morally admirable, might have weakened the military's grip. And the empire was just vast, perhaps too centralized and difficult to manage effectively. After Ashoka's death in 232 BC, it starts to fragment pretty quickly. Internal squabbles, weak rulers, it limps on for about 50 years.
Until the last Mauryan emperor is assassinated by his own general.
Yes, Pushyamitra Shunga, his commander-in-chief, kills him during a military parade in 185 BC and founds his own dynasty, the Shunga dynasty.
And with that central Mauryan authority gone, India fragments again. We see invasions from the northwest, Greeks, Scythian, Kushans.
Exactly. It falls back into a pattern of regional powers and foreign incursions for several centuries. It really highlights that challenge. Unifying India is one thing. Holding it together under a single centralized rule is incredibly difficult.
A lesson the next major empire, the Guptas, seems to have learned. #####6. The Gupta Golden Age, early.
Yes. When unity returns under the Gupta dynasty in the early 4th century CE, they use a different model.
How is the Gupta approach to empire different from the Mauryans?
It was much more decentralized. The Guptas directly controlled the core territories in the Ganges Valley, but they allowed regional kings and rulers considerable autonomy in their own land. As long as these local rulers acknowledged Gupta overlordship, paid tribute, maybe provided troops, they were largely left alone. This tributary system was much better suited to managing India's immense diversity than the Mauryan top-down bureaucratic approach.
And this period, the Gupta era, is often called India's golden age, right? A time of peace, prosperity, and incredible cultural and scientific achievement.
Absolutely. It saw a flowering of arts, literature, science, mathematics. Much of this centered around institutions like the great university at Nalanda.
Nalanda, founded by the Guptas, a major center of Buddhist learning, but not just Buddhist.
Right. Nalanda, in modern Bihar, was a huge monastic university complex. While a major center for Buddhist philosophy and logic thinkers like Dignaga were based there, it was famously patronized by non-Buddhist Gupta rulers and taught a wide range of subjects: Veda studies, medicine, astronomy, grammar. It attracted students from all over Asia.
And the scientific achievements from this era are just staggering, especially in mathematics. Aryabhata,
Working in the late 5th, early 6th centuries, he correctly explained solar and lunar eclipses, understood the Earth rotated on its axis. He calculated the value of pi remarkably accurately to 3.14110. He might have even deduced pi was irrational, and he's credited with developing key trigonometric concepts like the sine and cosine function, foundational stuff for global science.
And this is also when the concept of zero really takes.
Yes, building on earlier Indian ideas of a placeholder. Scholars like Varhamihura around the 6th century are among the earliest we can date who consistently used a specific symbol for zero as a number in its own right. Crucial for the decimals, a world-changing innovation developed in India.
Culturally, the Guptas were the first major empire to really champion Hinduism, weren't they? Codifying beliefs that had been developing for millennia from...
That's right. While tolerant of Buddhism and Jainism, the Guptas were predominantly Hindu rulers. This era sees the formalization of key Hindu concepts like the Trimurti, the Trinity of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer, regenerator. Vishnu, often appearing through his avatars like Krishna or Rama, became particularly popular.
And the great epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, they reached their sort of final recognizable forms during it.
Yes, these vast, sprawling stories, which are central to Indian culture even today, longer than the Bible and Quran combined, were compiled and edited into the versions we largely know during the Gupta.
You mentioned that story about Arjuna and Jadratha's head before. The sheer drama and scale
It really is. The Mahabharata especially is full of these complex moral dilemmas, epic battles, divine intervention. It's a cornerstone of Indian civilization, shared across regions and language.
But this golden age also had its dark sides, its paradox. Prosperity, yes, but what about social structures, particularly for women?
That's a crucial point. We have accounts, like from the Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Faxian, who visited around 415 CE, noting prosperity, charity, hospitals for the poor. So material well-being seems high, but simultaneously, other sources indicate a marked decline in the status of women compared to earlier periods. They lost rights, were increasingly excluded from religious education, like studying the Vedas. There was even a growing belief that women couldn't achieve spiritual liberation directly. They'd have to be reborn as men. And the practice of sati, widow immolation, seems to become more frequent, or at least more accepted during the...
Which brings us to the Kama Sutra, often misunderstood in the West as just a sex myth.
Right, but it's actually much more. It's a guide to virtuous living, pleasure, and social conduct within the context of the time. Yes, it discusses sex, but also relationship duties, managing a household, social graces. It reflects the era's view of women, skilled in arts and household management, financially astute within the home, but ultimately expected to be obedient and subordinate within a highly structured social system.
So, a complex picture. Golden age for some, perhaps, but with significant social restrictions and inequalities hardening. And like the Mauryans, the Gupta Empire eventually declined.
Yes, gradually, from the late 5th into the mid-6th century. Powerful regional governors asserted independence, breaking away, and costly wars defending against foreign invaders, particularly the Hunas, related to the Huns who troubled Rome, drained the imperial treasury and weakened central control.
And so India fragments once again, setting the stage for the medieval period.
Back to regional power.
Okay, post-Gupta, back to a patchwork of regionals. There's a brief moment of larger unity in the north under Harsha in the 7th century.
Yes, Harsha Vardhan. He belonged to the Pushyabhuti dynasty and managed to unite a significant empire stretching from Punjab across central India. He's remembered quite positive. Known for religious tolerance, he patronized both Hindus and Buddhists. He was also an intellectual himself, apparently a talented lute player, and he even wrote 3 Sanskrit plays that survive.
We know a fair bit about him from his court biographer, Banapada, and the Chinese monk Xuanzang court.
Exactly. Xuanzang praised his just rule, his charity, his intellectual gathering. Harsha even sent embassies to Tang, China.
Yeah.
But like so many of these unifiers.
Didn't outlast him.
No. He died in 647 CE without a clear heir, and his empire dissolved almost immediately back to fragmentation.
Meanwhile, further south in the Deccan Plateau, the Chalukya dynasty powerful warrior king.
Very powerful, especially Pulakeshin II. He famously defeated Harsha's army trying to push south around 619 CE, establishing the Narmada River as the boundary. But the Chalukyas are also significant for they repelled the first major Arab naval expedition aimed at conquest near Thane, close to modern Mumbai, around 636 during the reign of Caliph Umar, early sign of the interaction.
That early encounter foreshadows centuries of conflict and interaction. This leads into the so-called tripartite struggle for control of North India.
Yes, roughly from the mid-8th to the late 10th century. It's basically 3 major empires constantly battling for dominance over the rich heartland of northern India, particularly the strategic city of Connaught. You have the Pratiharas, based in the west, in Gujarat.
They were known as staunch defenders against early Muslim incursion west.
Very much so. Arab accounts call the Pratihara ruler Mihira Voja the greatest foe of Islam, formed a major. Then, dominant in the Deccan, you had the Rashtrakutas.
And they had a very different approach to the Muslim world.
Completely different. The Rashtrakutas were known for their religious tolerance. They actively encouraged trade with the Arab world, allowed Muslim communities to settle, build mosques, a much more cosmopolitan approach. And the third power, based in the east, in Bengal and Bihar, were the Pallas.
The last major Buddhist dynasty in India.
Yes, the Pallas were great patrons of Buddhism, particularly Mahayana Buddhism in Nalanda University. They were renowned for scholarship and had strong cultural links with Tibet and Southeast Asia. So these 3 powers circled each other, thought, allied for centuries.
While all this is happening in the north and center, what's going on in the far south, the Tamil-speaking?
Southern India, or Tamil Takam, had its own distinct cultural trajectory. Early Tamil literature, the Sangam poems, dating from maybe the 3rd century BC to the 3rd century CE, paints a picture of society where the rigid Varna system of the north seems largely absent or not yet dominant, a different social structure.
The south was dominated for a long time by 3 major dynasties, the Muventar, the Cheras, Pandya, Chola.
Right. They were often rivals, but from the late 9th century, the Chola dynasty, centered in the Kaveri Delta, rises to become incredibly powerful. They achieved a level of unification in the south that hadn't really been seen before. Founded properly around 893.
And the Cholas are really exceptional in Indian history because they built an overseas empire, didn't they?
They did. That's what makes them stand out. Under great rulers like Rajaraja I, and especially his son Rajendra I in the early 11th century, Rajendra completed the conquest of Sri Lanka. Then he launched these massive naval expeditions eastward, across the Bay of Bengal.
Into Southeast Asia, Sumatra, Malay Peninsula.
Exactly. He conquered parts of the Srivijaya Empire in Sumatra, parts of modern Malaysia and Thailand. For a time, the Bay of Bengal was essentially, as historians have called it, a Chola lake.
How did they manage that? It requires huge resources.
Massive resources. They had a huge standing army, but critically, they built and maintained the largest navy India had probably ever seen up to that point. And it was funded by trade. They dominated the sea lanes, traded extensively with Song Dynasty China, with Egypt, the Middle East. They were a major maritime power on a world scale. ####9. The rise of the Delhi Sultanate.
Okay, so while the Cholas are projecting power overseas, back in North India, the dynamic with Islamic powers is shifting from raiding and trading towards outright conquest.
Yes. We mentioned the early Arab conquest of Sindh in 712. That was somewhat peripheral. The really decisive shift comes later, with invasions from Afghanistan. First, Mahmud of Ghazni in the early 11th century. He launched repeated devastating raids into northern India, sacking temples, carrying off immense wealth. He annexed the Punjab.
And then Muhammad of Ghor, a century later.
Muhammad of Ghor aimed for permanent conquest. After initial setbacks, he defeated the major Rajput confederacy led by Prithviraj Chauhan in 1192. This victory opened the gateway to the Ganges Plain. Muhammad returned to Afghanistan, leaving his Turkic slave general, Qutbuddin Aybak, in charge. When Muhammad of Ghor was assassinated in 1206, Aybak declared himself Sultan in Delhi, founding the Delhi Sultanate.
This first dynasty is called the Slave Dynasty, or Mamluk Dynasty, made up of these Turkic slave soldiers who rose to power.
Right. They consolidated control over much of northern India, establishing a new Turco-Persian ruling elite. They also faced constant pressure from Mongol raids coming from Central Asia.
The Sultanate saw several dynasties. The Khaljis followed the Slave Dynasty and produced one of the most infamous sultans, Alauddin Khulji.
Infamous is right. He came to power by murdering his uncle and father-in-law the previous. His reign was marked by military expansion, sacking rich southern kingdoms like Warangol, but also extreme tyranny and paranoia.
He imposed harsh taxes, price controls, cracked down brutally on potential rivals, and that massacre of the Mongol conquest.
Yes, the new Muslims. He allowed thousands of Mongols who had converted to Islam to settle near Delhi, then became suspicious of them and ordered a mass execution, killing reportedly tens of thousands of men, women, and children in a single brutal.
The Tughlaq dynasty followed the Khalji, known for ambitious projects but also erratic policy, harsh measures against Hindus. Their decline led to fragmentation.
Yes, under the later Tughlaqs, the Sultanate started shrinking. Costly campaigns, rebellions, discriminatory policies, provinces began breaking away. This leads to the rise of major rival kingdoms in the 14th and 15th centuries. In the Deccan, the Bahmani Sultanate emerges, ruled by a Muslim aristocracy, but often employing Hindu administrators and even European mercenaries. They were possibly the first to use gunpowder artillery effective.
And their great rival to the south was the powerful Hindu empire of Vijayanagar.
Exactly. Vijayanagara consciously positioned itself as a bastion of traditional Hindu kingship and culture, in direct opposition to the sultanates to its north. The rivalry between Bahmani and Vijayanagara was intense, constant warfare, shifting alliances, and sometimes triggered by the most bizarre things.
Like the War of the Goldsmith's daughter you mentioned.
That incident from 1406 really sums it up. The Vijayanagaraya Devraya VI hears about a beautiful daughter of a goldsmith in Bahmani territory, decides he must marry her, sends envoys. She refuses, partly on religious grounds.
So he invades to kidnap her.
Basically, yes. Marches his army north. The Bahmani Sultan defends his territory, defeats Devraya, and the peace treaty is extraordinary. Devraya is forced to give his own daughter in marriage to the Bahmani Sultan's son, pay a huge indemnity, and the goldsmith's daughter ends up marrying another son of the Bahmani Sultan. Personal desire, sparky state.
It shows just how intertwined personal honor, religion, and politics were in this fractured landscape. By the early 16th century, North India was weakened, divided, ripe for another conquest.
Precisely. The Delhi Sultanate was a shadow of its former self, especially after Timur's devastating sack of Delhi in 1398. The stage was perfectly set for a new power from Central Asia, the Mughals, and that new power arose in 1526 with Babur. He claimed descent from both Timur, Tamerlane, and Genghis Khan. Quite the pedigree.
Comes down from Afghanistan, defeats the last Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, at the First Battle of Panipat, establishes Mughal.
Yes. Panipat is key because Babur effectively used gunpowder weapons cannons and matchlock muskets against Lodi's larger, more traditional army reliant on cavalry and elephants, a sign of changing warfare. Babur himself was a fascinating figure. A hardened warrior, but also a cultured scholar, wrote famous memoirs. But he remained somewhat aloof, preferring his Central Asian Persian culture didn't fully integrate into it.
That integration really happens under his grandson, Akbar, reigning from 1556-5. He's often compared to Ashoka, a unifier, an innovator.
A very good comparison. Akbar is arguably the greatest Mughal emperor. Militarily, he consolidated and expanded the empire huge. He fully embraced gunpowder technology, making the Mughal army the most powerful force on the subcontinent. But his real genius was political and culture. He pursued a policy of radical religious tolerance and inclusion.
How did he do that in practice?
Several ways. He actively recruited Hindu Rajput nobles into the highest levels of his administration and military. He married several Rajput princesses himself, bringing their families into the imperial fold. Crucially, in 1564, he abolished the jizya, discriminatory poll tax on non-Muslims that previous sultanates had enforced, a hugely symbolic and popular move among the Hindu majority. He even tried to promote a syncretic spiritual path, the Dini Ilahi, though it didn't really catch.
And he held those famous debates in his court, inviting scholars from different religions.
Yes, at his house of worship, or Ibadat Khana. He'd bring together Muslim scholars, Hindu Brahmins, Jain monks, Parsi priests, even Jesuit missionaries from Europe, and encourage them to debate theology and philosophy. Akbar was genuinely curious, trying to find common ground. This policy created remarkable stability and loyalty for decades. We also see during the Mughal era, perhaps surprisingly, some incredibly powerful and influential women operating at the heart of the empire.
Like Nur Jahan, Jahangir's.
Exactly. Nur Jahan, wife of Akbar's son, Jahangir. She wasn't just a consort, she was a major political force. Jahangir was supposedly more interested in arts and, frankly, drinking and opium. Nur Jahan effectively ran the state for periods. She had coins struck in her name, issued royal decrees, made key appointments. She was a brilliant politician, a formidable figure.
And then, of course, Mumtaz Mahal, wife of Shah Jahan. Her death led to the Taj Mahal.
Mumtaz Mahal, Shah Jahan's beloved wife and trusted advisor. She died tragically young in 1631 during childbirth. Shah Jahan was devastated. He commissioned the Taj Mahal in Agra as her mausoleum. It took over 20 years to build, completed around 1643, an architectural masterpiece, a symbol of eternal love, but also a stunning display of Mughal wealth, power, and artistry. The story about cutting off the builder's hands is almost certainly a myth, by the way.
So Akbar's tolerance, the cultural flourishing under Jahangir and Shah Jahan, this seems like the peak, but it starts to unravel under Aurangzeb.
Yes, Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's son, reigned for nearly 50 years, 1658-1707. He marked a decisive shift away from Akbar's policy. Aurangzeb was a devout Orthodox Sunni Muslim, and he reversed many of the tolerant practices.
He reinstated the jizya tax, cracked down on Hindu practice.
Yeah, he reimposed the jizya in 1679. He curtailed court music and arts he deemed un-Islamic. He ordered the destruction of some prominent Hindu temples, which caused huge resentment. He even established Islamist morality police in cities. This hardline approach alienated large sections of the population. His persecution of the Sikhs was particularly harsh.
He executed the 9th Sikh guru, Teg Bahadur.
Yes, in 1675 for refusing to convert to Islam. This act galvanized Sikh resistance, transforming them from a primarily religious community into a more militarized political force, the Khalsa, under the 10th Guru, Gobind Singh. It sparked decades of rebellion in the Punjab.
And Aurangzeb also spent years bogged down fighting the Marathas in the
decade. Shivaji Bhosle, a brilliant Maratha chieftain, carved out an independent kingdom in the Western Ghats, challenging Mughal authority directly. Aurangzeb spent the last 25 years of his reign campaigning in the Deccan, draining the imperial treasury and manpower, but failing to fully suppress the Marathas. His overexpansion and reversal of tolerant policies fatally weakened the empire. Hashtag, the European foot in the door. And while the Mughals were grappling with these internal issues, European powers were becoming more assertive on the coast.
Starts with the Portuguese, Vasco da Gama reaching Calicut in 1498, initially just another group of traders.
Pretty much. Indian rulers saw them as traders, perhaps a bit rough, but controllable. However, the Europeans had a crucial advantage: naval firepower. They defeated a combined Egyptian-Gujarati fleet in 1509 off Due, demonstrating naval superiority. The Portuguese seized Goa in 1510, establishing their first permanent fortification.
Then come the English, the East India Company, chartered by Queen Elizabeth I in 100.
Right. The EIC initially tried competing in the Spice Islands, Indonesia, but got pushed out by the more powerful Dutch, so they focused their efforts on India. A key early success was defeating a Portuguese fleet at the Battle of Swali, near Surat, in 1612. This impressed the Mughals.
And Emperor Jahangir actually granted them trading rights and protection. He saw them as useful.
Yes, Jahangir issued a firman royal decree, allowing the English to establish a factory at Surat. He likely saw them as a counterweight to the Portuguese, and valuable for bringing in silver and trade goods. Probably didn't see them as a long-term threat at all.
But as Mughal central authority weakened after Aurangzeb's death in 1707, things changed rapidly.
Dramatically. The empire started to decentralize fast. Powerful provincial governors, the Nawabs like in Bengal, Awadh, Hyderabad, became effectively independent rulers, though often still acknowledging the Mughal emperor nominally. The empire was also hit by devastating invasion. Nadir Shah of Persia sacked Delhi in 1739, carrying off immense treasures, including the Peacock Throne. Then the Afghans under Ahmad Shah Durrani invaded repeatedly, sacking Delhi again in 1757.
So, by the mid-18th century, the Mughal emperor is a figure, and the real power lies with regional rulers and the Marathas.
Exactly. The Maratha Confederacy, expanding out from the Deccan, had become the dominant indigenous power across large parts of India by the 1750s. It wasn't a centralized empire, more a confederacy ruled by powerful Maratha families: Peshwa, Scindia, Holkar, Gaikwad, and Bhonsle. Hashtag 12. From trade to territorial conquest, EIC era.
This chaotic situation, with a weak center and competing regional powers, created the perfect opportunity for the Europeans, especially the British and French, to play kingmaker and eventually become themselves.
Precisely. European rivalry spilled over into India in the Carnatic Wars, fought between the 1740s and 1773, mostly in the south. The British and French backed rival Indian princes. Ultimately, the British, led by figures like Robert Clive, defeated the French, decisively capturing Pondicherry in 17. That essentially ended French ambitions of building an Indian empire, leaving the British EIC as the dominant Europe.
But the real turning point, the shift from trader to ruler, comes in Bengal with the
Black Hole of Calcutta in 1756. The young Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, was angered by the British fortifying Calcutta without permission. He attacked and captured the fort. The captured British prisoners, soldiers, and civilians were crammed into a tiny guardroom overnight. Conditions were horrific: heat, lack of air. Accounts vary, but a large number, perhaps dozens or even over 100, died of suffocation.
And the British used this tragedy as a pretext for war.
Absolutely. It became a major propaganda point, fueling outrage back in Britain and justifying military action. Robert Clive led an EIC force back to Bengal,
leading to the Battle of Plassey in 1757, which wasn't really a battle.
Not really a fair fight, no. Siraj-ud-Dowlah had a huge army, maybe 50,000 men. Clive had about 3,000 troops, mostly Indian sepoys. But Clive had secretly conspired with Mir Jafar, one of Siraj's key generals. During the battle, Mir Jafar and his large contingent of troops stood aside, didn't fight. Siraj's army disintegrated. It was a decisive political victory achieved through bribery and betrayal more than military brilliance. Plassey is often seen as a moment the British truly began their conquest.
Mir Jafar was installed as the puppet Nawab, but the real power lay with the EIC, and this led direct...
Yes. After another victory at the Battle of Buxar in 1764, this time a genuine military win against the combined forces of the Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab of Awadh, and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. The British cemented their power. In 1765, Clive forced the Mughal Emperor to grant the East India Company the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This meant the EIC got the right to collect all the tax revenue from these incredibly rich provinces.
So the company transforms overnight from a trading firm into the effective sovereign government and tax collector for millions of people. Huge shift.
A fundamental transformation. They now had the financial resources of India's wealthiest region to fund their administration, their army, and further expansion.
And that expansion happened systematically over the next 80 years, age of absorption.
That's a good term for it. From 1765 to about 1849, the EIC relentlessly expanded its control, absorbing one independent state after another. They fought 4 wars against the powerful kingdom of Mysore in the south, finally defeating and killing its ruler, Tipu Sultan, in 1790. Mysore was annexed or turned into a subsidiary state. They fought 3 Anglo-Maratha wars between 1775 and 1818, systematically dismantling the Maratha Confederacy, the biggest rival power. And finally, the Sikh Empire in the Punjab, the last major independent Indian power. It had been built up by the formidable Ranjit Singh, but after his death in 1839, internal chaos weakened the Sikh. The British provoked 2 Anglo-Sikh wars. Sikhs fought fiercely, but were ultimately defeated, notably at the Battle of Sobraon in 46. The Punjab was annexed by 1849. By the mid-19th century, the EIC controlled directly or indirectly almost the entire subcontinent.
So the East India Company rules almost all of it, but their rule was pre-racist.
Deeply resented. The company's officials were often corrupt, focused on enriching themselves. There was widespread economic disruption as traditional industries declined, and there was this pervasive sense of cultural arrogance. The British genuinely believed their civilization was superior and sought to impose their values, language, and education system. Policies like the doctrine of lapse, where the British annexed states if a ruler died without a direct heir, caused huge anxiety among Indian princes. All this built up pressure, which finally exploded in 1857.
The Great Rebellion, or the Sepoy Mutiny, triggered by those infamous rifle cartridges.
The immediate spark, yes. Rumors spread among the Sepoys, the Indian soldiers in the EIC army, that the grease used on the new Enfield rifle cartridges, which they had to bite open, was made from cow and pig fat.
Anathema to both Hindus and Muslims.
Absolutely. It seemed like a deliberate attempt to defile their religion. In May 1857, Sepoys in Meerut mutinied, killed their British officers, and marched to Delhi. They proclaimed the aged Mughal Emperor, Bahadur Shah II, who was living in Delhi as a British pensioner, as the leader of the rebellion. The uprising spread rapidly across northern and central India.
It wasn't just sepoys, though, was it? Civilians, landowners, princes joined it.
Yes, it became a much wider revolt against British rule in many areas, though it remained fragmented. But the British response, once they regrouped, was brutal. They recaptured Delhi after a long siege. There were mass executions, villages burned. Lucknow saw horrific fighting. The Mughal Emperor was captured, his sons executed, and he was exiled to Burma. The Mughal Empire was formally dissolved.
And the failure of the EIC to prevent or manage the rebellion led directly to the end of company.
Yes. The British government decided the EIC could no longer be trusted to govern India. The Government of India Act of 1858 transferred power directly to the British Crown. Queen Victoria was later proclaimed Empress of India. This marks the beginning of the British Raj direct rule from London.
Under the Raj, how did the economic structure work? Still geared towards Britain's benefit.
Entirely. India became a captive market for British manufactured goods and a crucial source of raw materials for British industry. Exports boomed: cotton, jute, indigo, wheat, and especially opium.
Opium, that was a huge export.
Massive. Grown in India, largely forcibly, and exported mainly to China to pay for Britain's tea import. In the 1860s, opium counted for up to 30% of India's export revenue. Tea production with India also exploded, reaching 70,000 tons exported annually by 1900.
And the railways they built, often hailed as a great benefit.
They did connect the country, yes, but their primary strategic purpose was clear: to move troops quickly, to suppress dissent, and to transport raw materials efficiently from the interior to the ports for export. They weren't primarily designed to foster internal Indian economic development or passenger travel for.
And the social dynamic. The British remained a tiny minority, ruling hundreds of millions. How did they manage that?
Through a combination of military force, administrative control, the seal frame of the Indian civil service, and a carefully cultivated ideology of racial superiority and They lived largely separate lives in segregated cantonments and civil lines. There was a pervasive belief that Indians could only achieve progress by adopting English education, language, and manners, which created deep alienation.
Some British reforms were arguably progressive, like banning sati completely in 1829 or slavery in 1883, but even these were sometimes resisted.
Yes, because even positive changes imposed by foreigners felt like an attack on traditional culture and autonomy. Indians increasingly felt that change, if it was to come, should come from within Indian society itself. A good example is the Age of Consent Act in 1891, which tried to raise the minimum age for marriage for girls. While supported by some Indian reformers, it sparked massive protests, particularly from Orthodox Hindus in Bengal, who saw it as unacceptable interference in religious customs. #14. The seeds of mass mobilization, this growing sense of alienation and the desire for a greater Indian voice in governance, led to the formation of the Indian National Congress, INC, in 1885.
Started by educated Indians and even some sympathetic Britons as a forum to discuss issues and petition the government.
Exactly. Initially quite moderate, composed mainly of upper-class, Western-educated professionals, they sought greater representation within the existing system, embracing democratic ideals. But it grew rapidly from 73 delegates at the first session to over 2,000 within 4 years.
But this period also saw growing tensions between Hindus and Muslims, which the British sometimes exploited.
Yes. The late 19th century saw rising communal tension. British policies sometimes exacerbated this, for instance, by setting up separate electorates or legal systems in some areas. Cultural disputes also flared up, most notably the cow protection movement in the 1890s. Hindu revivalist groups agitated against the slaughter of cows, leading to riots and violence with Muslims, for whom beef was a food source and cow sacrifice sometimes a religious practice. These tensions led many Muslims to feel that the INC, dominated by Hindus, didn't adequately represent their interests. This eventually led to the formation of the All India Muslim League in 1906, formally constituted 13, as a separate political platform for Muslims.
A crucial moment that demonstrated the potential power of mass protest was the reaction to the partition of Bengal 5.
Absolutely. The British Viceroy, Lord Curzon, decided to partition the large province of Bengal, ostensibly for administrative efficiency. But the partition line was drawn largely along a religious line, creating a Muslim-majority East Bengal and a Hindu-majority West Bengal. Bengali Hindus saw this as a deliberate divide-and-rule tactic aimed at weakening Bengali nationalism and their political influence. The reaction was furious and widespread.
This sparked the Swadeshi movement, boycotting British goods.
Yes, Swadeshi means of one's own country. It became a massive campaign of economic non-cooperation. People pledged to boycott British cloth, sugar, salt, etc., and promote Indian-made goods instead. There were huge public bonfires of foreign goods. It was remarkably effective. British imports dropped significantly, by some estimates 25% by 1908. The British were eventually forced to annul the partition in 1911. But the Swadeshi movement was a watershed. It proved that mass mobilization and economic pressure could force the British to back down. It provided a template for future struggles.
Then came World War I. India contributed massively to the British war effort.
Huge. Around 1.5 million Indian soldiers served overseas. In Europe, the Middle East, Africa, over 70,000 died. Indian resources also supported the war effort significantly.
And this sacrifice led to expectations of greater political rights after the war?
Absolutely. Indians felt they had earned greater autonomy, even self-government, Swaraj, through their loyalty and sacrifice. There was widespread disillusionment when the British seemed reluctant to offer significant reforms. This dissatisfaction actually led to a temporary bridging of the Hindu-Muslim divide. In the Lucknow Pact of 1916, the INC and the Muslim League agreed on a common set of demands for democratic reform, including separate electorates for Muslims, a moment of rare unity. #15. Gandhi, violent.
But any goodwill was shattered by the Amritsar massacre in 1990, a truly horrific event.
A turning point. In April 1919, during protests against repressive new laws, the Rowlatt Acts, a large, peaceful crowd gathered in the Jallianwala Bagh, an enclosed garden in Amritsar, many to celebrate the Sikh festival of Baisakhi. Brigadier General Reginald Dyer, believing the gathering was a deliberate act of defiance, arrived with troops, blocked the main exit, and ordered his soldiers to open fire without warning into the dense crowd.
Firing until the ammunition ran out.
Essentially, yes. The firing lasted about 10 minutes. Official British figures later admitted to 379 killed and over 1,200 wounded, though Indian estimates were much higher. It was a cold-blooded massacre of unarmed civilians. The shock and outrage across India were immense. It destroyed any remaining faith in British justice for many. Winston Churchill himself called it monstrous. It galvanized the independence movement like never before.
And this is where Mahatma Gandhi really emerges as the undisputed leader of that movement.
Yes, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. He'd already gained prominence for his activism championing Indian rights in South Africa for over 20 years. He returned to India in 1915. After Amritsar, he launched his first nationwide non-cooperation campaign. He brought a unique philosophy and strategy, satyagraha.
Which means truth force or soul force, more than just passive resistance.
Much more. Satyagraha involved active but nonviolent resistance to unjust laws. It meant refusing to cooperate with the government, boycotting institutions, courts, schools, foreign goods, but always peacefully, always maintaining the moral high ground. The aim was not to defeat the opponent physically, but to convert them through self-suffering and demonstrating the injustice of their actions.
His leadership in challenging specific symbolic injustices was incredibly powerful, like the Salt March in 1930.
The Salt March is iconic. The British British maintained a monopoly on salt production and taxed it heavily, affecting even the poorest Indians. Gandhi decided to defy this law. He led a group of followers on a 240-mile march from his ashram to the coastal village of Dandi in Gujarat. It took 24 days, attracting huge crowds and international media attention along the way.
And when he reached the sea,
he ceremonially picked up a lump of natural salt from the seashore, symbolically breaking the British law. He declared, "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." It sparked nationwide civil disobedience. Millions of Indians started making their own salt, boycotting government salt depots. The British responded with mass arrests. Over 60,000 people, including Gandhi, were jailed. But it demonstrated the power of nonviolent mass action to challenge the Raj at its core.
This struggle continued through the 1930s and into World War II. India again contributed massively to the Allied war effort.
Yes, around 2.5 million Indians served in WWII. Even more than WWI. But the political situation was tense. The INC refused to support the war effort unless India was granted immediate independence.
When the British refused, Gandhi launched the Quit India movement in 1942.
A call for immediate British withdrawal. Do or die was the slogan. The British responded swiftly and harshly, arresting Gandhi and almost the entire INC leadership, along with tens of thousands of activists. Around 90,000 were imprisoned. The movement was suppressed, but it showed the depth of anti-British feeling.
And some nationalists took a different path. Subhas Chandra Bose.
Yes. Bose, a former INC president who disagreed with Gandhi's nonviolence, escaped house arrest, traveled to Germany and then Japan. He believed India could only achieve independence through armed struggle, collaborating with the Axis powers. He formed the Indian National Army, INA, mostly from Indian prisoners of war captured by the Japanese in Southeast Asia. The INA, alongside the Japanese, attempted to invade India through Burma in 1944, Operation Yugo.
That invasion failed militarily.
It failed, yes. But Bose became a controversial hero for many Indians, symbolizing armed resistance against the British, even though he allied with fascist powers. Meanwhile, another tragedy struck India during the war, the Bengal famine of 1943.
Caused partly by the Japanese conquest of Burma, cutting off rice, but made worse by British.
Yes. Poor harvests, wartime disruption, hoarding, and the British government's failure to adequately respond and distribute food relief led to a catastrophic famine in Bengal. Estimates suggest anywhere from 1 to 3 million people starved to death. This disaster further eroded British legitimacy and strengthened the argument that they were incapable of governing India effectively or prioritizing Indian lives.
So by the end of WWII, independence seemed inevitable. But the question was, independence into what? One nation or two?
That became the crucial, tragic question. The INC, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, after Gandhi stepped back from direct leadership, demanded a unified, independent India. But the Muslim League, under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was now adamant. They argued Muslims were a separate nation and demanded a fully independent state of their own. Pakistan, land of the pure. The divide seems unbridgeable. The post-war Labour government in Britain was committed to Indian independence, but faced this intractable problem of the Hindu-Muslim divide. Communal violence was escalating.
Negotiations failed. Partition was deemed the only way forward, however reluctant.
Yes, the last viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, was given the task of overseeing the transfer of power and partition. He controversially accelerated the timeline, setting the date for withdrawal as August 15, 1947.
And the borders between India and the newly created Pakistan, itself divided into West and East Pakistan, were drawn up incredibly quick and kept secret until the very last minute.
Disastrously so. So Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer who had never been to India before, was given just 5 weeks to draw the boundaries through incredibly complex, intermingled regions like Punjab and Bengal. The final border details weren't agreed upon until early August, and only formally announced on August 14th for Pakistan, and 15th for India after independence had already been declared.
Which meant millions of people literally didn't know which country they were in when independence arrived. Chaos.
Utter chaos. It triggered one of the largest, most brutal mass migrations in human history. Perhaps 15 million people, Hindus and Sikhs fleeing Pakistan for India, Muslims fleeing India for Pakistan, were uprooted. The newly formed governments were completely unprepared and overwhelmed. Support systems collapsed. Hundreds of thousands died from disease, starvation, exhaustion.
And the violence was
unspeakable. Communal frenzy gripped many areas. Trains packed with refugees were ambushed and massacred. Entire villages were wiped out. Estimates of the dead ranged from several 100,000 to over 1 million people. It was a catastrophic birth for both nations. ####17. The new nation's baptism of fire.
And the violence didn't stop at the border. The status of the princely states, which hadn't been directly ruled by the British, created immediate conflict, especially Kashmir.
Yes, the hundreds of princely states were technically free to choose which country to join or remain independent. Most joined based on geography or the ruler's preference. Kashmir was complex. A Muslim-majority population ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh. He initially hesitated, hoping for independence, but a rebellion by Muslim subjects, aided by Pashtun tribesmen invading from Pakistan, forced his hand. He appealed to India for military help, signing the Instrument of Accession to join India in October 1947.
Indian troops were airlifted in, leading to the First Indo-Pakistani War.
Exactly. Pakistani troops intervened, and war raged until a UN-brokered ceasefire in 1949. The ceasefire line established the Temporary Line of Control, LOC, dividing Kashmir between Indian and Pakistani administration. That dispute over the territory both nations claim in full has poisoned relations ever since, leading to further wars and remaining one of the world's most dangerous.
And amidst this turmoil, India suffered another profound, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi.
Just months after independence, on January 30th, 1948, Gandhi was shot dead by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist extremist.
Godse felt Gandhi was too accommodating towards Muslims in Pakistan, betraying Hindu.
That was his justification. Godse and his co-conspirators blamed Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence and his efforts to foster peace between Hindus and Muslims for weakening India and enabling partition. His assassination sent shockwaves across the nation and the world. The father of the nation was gone.
Yet, despite the trauma of partition, war, and Gandhi's death, India pressed ahead with building its new state. The constitution was adopted in 1950.
A remarkable achievement under the circumstances. India adopted its constitution on January 26, 1950, declaring itself a sovereign democratic republic. It enshrined fundamental rights and laid out a vision for the nation based on three core principles: democracy, with universal adult suffrage from the outset; secularism, guaranteeing freedom of religion and protecting all faiths despite the trauma of religious partition; and social justice, specifically protecting historically marginalized groups.
Like the former untouchables and tribal communities.
Yes, the Constitution formally abolished untouchability. It created categories of scheduled castes, Dalits former untouched, and scheduled tribe, Adivasi groups, and guaranteed them special protections, including reservations, affirmative action, and government jobs and education, to try and remedy centuries of discrimination. Nehruvian socialism and the India Dynasty.
India's first prime minister was Jawaharlal Nehru, Gandhi's political heir. He dominated Indian politics until his death in 1994. What was his vision for India's development?
Nehru championed a model of democratic socialism and state-led development. He believed in central planning, implementing a series of 5-year plans to guide industrialization and economic growth. Key industries like steel, aviation, energy were kept under state control, public sector undertakings, or PSU. There were significant successes. India achieved impressive industrial growth rates in the early decades, becoming the 7th largest industrial economy by 1965. Nehru invested heavily in higher education, science, and technology, founding institutions like the prestigious Indian Institutes of Technology. He also pushed through reforms improving women's inheritance.
And on the world stage, Nehru was a major figure in the non-aligned movement.
Yes, he co-founded the non-aligned movement, trying to steer a neutral course between the U.S. and Soviet blocs during the Cold War. India sought to maintain its strategic autonomy, but this neutrality was tested. India militarily annexed the Portuguese colony of Goa in 1961 after negotiations failed. And more seriously,
The border war with China in 19...
a brief but humiliating military defeat for India. Disputes over the Himalayan border led to a short, sharp conflict that exposed weaknesses in India's military preparedness and dented Nehru's prestige. He died less than 2 years later.
After a brief interlude, Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, became prime minister in 1966. She ruled, with one gap, until a very different, more pragmatic, more ruthless, arguably more authoritarian than her father. She dominated the Congress Party in Indian politics, often accused of promoting nepotism, the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty. She had major successes, too. She presided over the Green Revolution, which dramatically increased food grain production, making India self-sufficient in food. She oversaw India's first successful nuclear test in 1974, making it the world's 6th nuclear power, and her greatest military triumph with a decisive victory over Pakistan in the 1971 war, which led to the creation of Bangladesh, formerly East Pakistan. She was hailed as a strong leader. But her rule was also deeply controversial.
Hugely controversial. In 1975, facing a court judgment that found her guilty of electoral malpractice, Indira Gandhi declared a nationwide state of emergency rather than resign. For nearly 2 years, 1975-77, democracy was suspended. Civil liberties were curtailed. Political opponents were jailed. The press was censored. She ruled by decree, effectively as a dictator. Though she eventually called elections in 1977 and lost power, she returned in 1980. The emergency remains a dark chapter.
And her second term ended tragically with the crisis in Punjab.
Yes. Growing Sikh separatism in Punjab led to militants, led by Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, fortifying the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar, the holiest Sikh shrine. In June 1984, Indira Gandhi ordered the army to storm the temple complex in Operation Blue Star. The operation was successful in clearing the militants, but caused heavy casualties and massive damage to the sacred site.
The outrage among Sikhs worldwide was immense.
Many Sikhs felt it was an unforgivable desecration. Just months later, on October 31st, 1984, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by 2 of her own Sikh bodyguards in revenge for Operation Blue Star.
Her assassination sparked anti-Sikh riots, particularly in Delhi. Her son, Rajiv Gandhi.
Rajiv Gandhi served as prime minister until 1989. He initiated some economic reforms and focused on technology, but his government was plagued by corruption. He, too, was assassinated in 1991 by a suicide bomber linked to the Tamil Tigers, LT, of Sri Lanka during an election campaign. That marked the end of the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty. Direct rip on power. Hashtag. Economic liberalization in the 21st century. Rajiv Gandhi's death coincided with a major economic crisis in India. One, a severe balance of payments crisis. India was close to defaulting on its foreign.
And this crisis forced a major shift in economic policy,
Yeah,
away from Nehru control.
A fundamental shift. The government, led by Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, implemented sweeping economic liberalization reform. They dismantled many aspects of the license rod, the complex state permits and regulations, opened up the economy to foreign investment, reduced trade barriers, and encouraged private enterprise.
And this liberalization led to significant...
Yes, India's economy started growing much faster from the 1990s onward. Per capita GDP rose significantly, poverty rates fell, though inequality remained huge. India became integrated into the global economy.
But modern India still faces enormous challenges, many rooted in its past. Old rivalries persist.
The Kargil War with Pakistan in 1999, fought over intrusions across the LOC in Kashmir, was a dangerous reminder that both countries now possess nuclear weapons. India also faces natural disasters, the devastating Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, major earthquakes like Gujarat in 2001, frequent floods, and internal security threats remain.
Terrorism, insurgencies.
Yes. Major terrorist attacks, like the coordinated attacks in Mumbai in 2008, blamed on Pakistan-based militants, and earlier train bombings in 2006. There's also the ongoing Naxalite Maoist insurgency in parts of central and eastern India.
Yet, alongside these challenges, India has achieved remarkable things in recent decades, particularly in technology.
Absolutely. India produces a vast number of highly skilled graduates in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEM, fueling its own tech industry like in Bangalore and Hyderabad, and contributing significantly to the global tech workforce. And its space program is incredibly successful and cost-effective. They reached Mars orbit on their first attempt in 2013 and successfully landed a rover near the moon's south pole in 2023. Major achievements.
And of course, the huge demographic milestone in 2024.
Yes, in March 2024, India officially surpassed China to become the world's most populous nation, over 1.4 billion people. A demographic giant. Hashtag 20, the Modi era, and a look to the future.
The current era of Indian politics has been dominated by Narendra Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, in power since 2014. His election marked a significant shift.
Yes. 2014 saw the first single-party majority government in 30 years, ending an era of coalition politics. Modi and the BJP won an even larger mandate in 2019. Economically, Modi has continued the trend of liberalization, focusing on attracting foreign investment, infrastructure development, Make in India. India overtook the UK to become the world's fifth largest economy in 2022.
But socially and politically, the BJP represents a different ideology, the revival of Hindutva.
That's the core of the BJP's platform. Hindutva is a form of Hindu nationalism. It emphasizes India's identity as fundamentally rooted in Hindu culture, values, and heritage. For supporters, this is seen as a positive reclamation of national pride and cultural identity after centuries of foreign rule and perceived secular appeasement of minorities. However, critics, both within India and internationally, argue that this focus on Hindu identity marginalizes minorities, particularly India's large Muslim population, around 200 million people, but also Sikhs and Christians. They fear it undermines India's constitutional commitment to secularism and could lead to increased communal tensions.
So, bringing this vast 30,000-year history right up to the present, how can we use this deep dive to understand India's trajectory? Is there a recent event that encapsulates?
I think the inauguration of the Ram Temple in Ayodhya in January 2024 is incredibly symbolic and ties many threads.
Ayodhya, believed by many Hindus to be the birthplace of Lord Rama, a major...
Exactly. The construction and inauguration of this grand temple, strongly supported by Modi and the BJP government, symbolizes the resurgence of Hindu cultural and political power. It echoes how ancient Indian kings patronized major religious sites to legitimize their rule. It speaks to the deep roots of Hindu tradition we discussed earlier.
But Ayodhya is also deeply divided. The temple was built on the site of a mosque, the Babri Masjid.
Precisely. The Babri Masjid, built in the 16th century, was destroyed by Hindu activists in 1992, sparking nationwide riots that killed thousands. They claim the mosque was built on the ruins of an earlier Ram temple destroyed by Babur, the first Mughal emperor. So the new temple's inauguration, while celebrated by many Hindus, also revives painful memories and the specter of religious conflict. It highlights that tension between celebrating ancient heritage and managing modern religious diversity, the very fault line that led to partition that plagued rulers like Aurangzeb.
So, India today, unified as never before under a strong central government, more populous than any other nation, a major economic and growing military power.
Yes, unquestionably a major global player. The question isn't if India can handle the global stage. It clearly can. The deeper question, illuminated by this long history, is internal.
Can the modern Indian state, particularly with its current emphasis on Hindu nationalism, successfully manage the country's incredible internal diversity? Or will this focus risk exacerbating the very divisions, religious, regional, caste that have repeatedly fragmented empires throughout past?
That's the fundamental challenge. History shows that empires in India often thrived when they found ways to accommodate diversity, like Akbar, and often fractured when they became too rigid or favored one group over others, like Aurangzeb.
So the final thought for you, the listener, is that will India's current leaders learn from the full sweep of their nation's history, finding a path that balances unity with diversity? Or will the powerful forces of nationalism focus primarily on one identity, ultimately lead back down that familiar historical path towards division and fragmentation? It's the oldest question in Indian politics, now playing out on a global scale.